The magistrate's gavel came down so hard it split the edge of the table, and Gideon Sullivan's stomach dropped straight through the flagstone floor. 3 months, the magistrate said, pointing the cracked gavel at him like a weapon. 3 months of unpaid tribute, Sullivan. The Crown doesn't forgive homestead debts because the harvest was bad. You either pay by the new moon or I post the forfeit notice on the gate and your land goes to Aldrich Crane. The hall was crowded. Gideon had known it would be. Market day in Thornwall always drew a crowd, and bad news spread faster than good grain. He could feel the stares from the benches behind him, the miller, the tanner's guild, 3 of Crane's hired men who had no business being at a tribute hearing except to watch him fail. He kept his jaw tight and his hands flat on his table. "I'll have the coin." "How?" The magistrate leaned back. He was not an unkind man, but he was a careful one. "You planted winter wheat on the southern quarter. The blight took half of it. Your oxen died in the cold snap. How, Sullivan?" "I'll find a way." The magistrate sighed and set down the ruined gavel. "New moon, 12 days. Gideon walked out of the hall into the raw morning air of Thornwall's market square, and stood there for a moment with his hands clenched at his sides and nowhere to look that wasn't already watching him. 12 days. He had 43 silver marks saved under the floorboard of his farmhouse. The tribute owed was 91. He had rebuilt this farm from scorched ground after the fire summer 3 years ago. His father's farm and his grandfather's before that. He was not going to lose it to Aldrich Crane, who had been circling the southern homesteads like a crow above a sick animal for 2 full years, buying out the desperate and the unlucky. Gideon Sullivan was neither, or at least he refused to be both at once. He turned his collar up against the wind off the Thornwall battlements and walked into the square to sell what he had. The market was loud and full of the kind of energy that early winter always brought to a walled town urgency under the noise. The smell of pickled goods and smoked meat, the clang of a farrier's hammer from the south alley. Gideon had 2 bolts of undyed wool, a string of salted river fish, and a half-barrel of last summer's cider that had turned just on the edge of sharp. Not much. Enough to put 5 or 6 marks in his pocket if he haggled well. He was setting up his corner stall near the eastern well when he first noticed the silence moving through the square. It started at the far gate, the one that opened north toward the old Greywood road. Not a total silence. The market never went fully quiet, but a directional hush. The way a crowd pulls back from something without meaning to, the way conversations stutter and eyes shift. Gideon looked up from knotting his wool onto the rack. She walked through the gate like she owned every cobblestone under her boots. She was an orc woman, which was itself not a cause for silence in Thornwall. The town sat on a trade road old enough to have seen every kind of traveler, and orcs passed through occasionally, usually in pairs or small groups, moving between the clan territories to the north and the lowland markets. But she was alone, and she carried herself in a way that made the crowd part without asking. She stood easily 2 inches taller than most of the men in the square, with the broad shoulders and dense, capable build of someone who had spent a lifetime working hard at something that mattered. Her skin was deep olive green, weathered and smooth at once, and her hair was black as river slate, pulled back in a thick braid that hung over one shoulder and was tied with a strip of dark leather. She had tusks, not the exaggerated slabs of fiertail illustrations, but real, elegant, upward-curving ivory that framed her lower lip and gave her face a wild, proud symmetry. Her eyes, as she swept the square, were amber gold, sharp and frank. She wore a fitted leather bodice the color of dark bark, laced tight over a deep green linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, showing the corded muscle of her forearms. Her trousers were travel-worn dark canvas tucked into knee-high boots, and a wide belt at her hip held a short-bladed hunting knife and a leather satchel worn flat from long use. The bodice was close-fitted, shaped for her specifically, and she wore it the way someone wears their own skin, completely without self-consciousness, as if it had never occurred to her to apologize for the way she looked. Gideon watched her cross the square with the same attention he gave to anything unusual that might be relevant to his survival. She went straight to the grain merchant, Aldous Venn, and placed a leather-wrapped bundle on his counter. They spoke. Venn shook his head. She said something else. Venn shook his head again, this time with his eyes down, not looking at her. Gideon had seen that particular kind of rudeness before, the refusal to engage, the deliberate smallness of it, and it made something stiffen in his chest. She did not argue. She picked up her bundle, turned from Venn's stall with a composure that could have cut glass, and moved on toward the cloth merchants. Same thing. Polite enough on the surface. But the cloth merchant's wife whispered something to her husband, and he shrugged and looked away, and suddenly had no inventory to discuss. Gideon watched her work through 4 stalls and get turned away from each one with that same particular flavor of dismissal that pretended to be nothing. Then she looked up and caught him watching. He did not look away. He had never been good at pretending not to notice things. She studied him for 3 full seconds across the width of the square, and her expression was completely unreadable. Not angry, not hopeful, just assessing. The way a good hunter reads a clearing before stepping into it. Then she walked toward him. "You sell wool," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was low and even, with the slight rolled consonants of the northern Orc tongue layered under her clean common speech. "And cider," Gideon said. "And fish, though I'd move fast on those." She looked at the fish. "What do you want for the whole string?" 4 marks. 3.5. "Done," he said, because 3.5 marks for a string of river fish was honest money, and she had not wasted either of their time, and he respected that. She counted the coins from a small purse at her belt, and laid them on the table with the same directness she did everything else. He folded the fish string in wax paper and handed it across. "Nobody else in the square would sell to me," she said, not accusing, just stating. "I noticed." She looked at him again. "Why did you?" "Because I have fish and you had coin and we agreed on a price," Gideon said. "That's generally how selling works." Something moved across her face that might, if the light was kind and you were paying attention, have been the beginning of a smile. "You are either very brave or very stupid." 12 days ago I might have argued against the second one, Gideon said. "Today I am less sure." She did almost smile then. It changed her face in a way that made him look at her differently, not as a thing to be assessed for danger or strangeness, but as a person in the middle of a hard morning who had just been reminded that not every door was shut. "Bagrak," she said, and held out her hand across the stall table. "Bagrak Darkwolf." He took it and shook it. Her grip was exactly what he had expected, steady, strong, not performing. "Gideon Sullivan, Homestead South Gate, 2 miles on the Creek Road. You farm." "I try to," he said. She studied him a moment longer, then gathered her bundle and her fish and gave him a short, precise nod, and walked back through the market the way she had come, not hurrying, not shrinking, just moving through the space with that same unbothered certainty. Gideon watched her go and then turned back to his wool, and tried to figure out why the morning suddenly felt less grinding than it had 10 minutes ago. He sold the wool and the cider by midday, went home with 61 marks all told, sat at his kitchen table that evening with a lantern and a piece of paper, and stared at the number he was still 30 marks short of, and tried to think his way through a problem that did not have a clean solution. He did not think much about Bagrak Darkwolf. Or rather, he told himself he did not, and then found her name in his head 3 separate times before he put out the lantern. He had seen her before. The recognition had been slow and distant, the way you sometimes remember a dream hours after waking. But by the time he was riding back down the creek road, it had settled into clarity. He had seen her 5 years ago, before the fire summer, before everything had gotten so permanently hard. She had come through Thornwall with a small orc trading party, and Gideon had been 26 and not yet so worn, and they had talked at the same eastern well for half an hour about nothing important. The road north, the price of tallow, whether the old Greywood was passable after the rains, and he had thought afterward that it was the most interesting half-hour conversation he'd had in months. He had thought about her for longer than he should have, after. But life had gotten in the way, as life tends to do, And then the fire summer had come and burned away everything that had felt light or easy, and he had stopped thinking about anything that wasn't survival. She had not recognized him, or if she had not said so. He stared at the lantern until the oil burned low, then went to bed. The next morning he was out before dawn with a spade and a bad back and the field that needed turning before the second cold came in. The creek road was quiet, and the sky was pink and gray over the eastern wall of Thornwall, and he was knee-deep in mud and half a prayer away from genuine despair when he heard boots on the road. Bagrak Darkwolf came up the creek road with a travel pack over one shoulder and stopped at his fence line. "I need work," she said. "Real work, not town work. I can see you need help." Gideon leaned on his spade and looked at her. "Can you turn soil?" "Better than you," she said frankly. He almost laughed. He had not almost laughed before noon in 3 years. "What do you want for it?" "Board and a fair wage. 4 days. I have business north of here that will not wait much longer." He thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. He had 12 days and 30 marks of problem and 1 spade. "I've got a bunkroom off the barn, separate from the house. Door latches from the inside." She looked at him steadily. "I did not ask about your hospitality." "I know," he said. "I'm just establishing what I have to offer." She vaulted the fence with a single clean motion that made the whole thing look effortless and landed beside him in the mud and held out her hand for the second spade leaning against the fence post. "Show me what you need turned." They worked through the morning. She was, as advertised, better at it than him. Not just stronger, though she was that, but more efficient, working with the rhythm of someone who understood soil and leverage and the particular logic of breaking ground. She did not talk much while she worked, but neither did he, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind where 2 people are both focused on the same task, and neither one needs to fill the air to feel less alone. By midday they had turned what Gideon calculated would have taken him 2 more full days alone. He made bread and bean soup on the fire inside and called her in for the noon meal. She ducked through the doorway, she was tall enough to need to, and sat at his table with the same matter-of-fact ease she brought to everything. "You are short on something," she said, looking at the room with frank assessment. Not judgmental, just observant. "Not just the soil work. Tribune payment," he said. "New moon. How much short?" 30 marks. She was quiet for a moment. "What happens if you miss it?" "Aldrich Crane buys my land from the crown." She looked at him with those gold eyes, and he noticed not for the first time but more consciously this time that her gaze had a quality of full attention that most people never gave anything. When Bagrak Darkwolf looked at you, she was actually looking at you, not through you or past you. "Who is Crane to you?" she asked. "Nobody. That's the point." Gideon broke bread and set half across to her. "He's been buying out every homestead between Thornwall and the river. He's got 12 now. He wants mine because the creek runs through it, water rights. And you would rather lose the farm entirely than sell to him." "I would rather not lose the farm at all," Gideon said. "But yes." She considered this, eating her soup without comment. "Tell me something," she said after a while. "Ask. 5 years ago, Thornwall Market at the East Well. You talked to me for a long time about whether the Greywood road was passable." The recognition hit him clean in the chest. "You remember." "I remember everything," she said simply. "I did not say it before because I wanted to see if you were the same as I remembered or if you had changed." He studied her face. "And?" "You are the same," she said. "You just look more tired." He let out a breath that was half a laugh. "Thank you for that." She looked down at her soup. "It is not an insult. Being the same after hard years is not a small thing." They ate in quiet for a moment, and Gideon was aware of something in the room that had not been there at the start of the meal, a warmth, a slight tilt in the air between them like a compass needle finding north. "Why Thornwall?" he asked. "What business do you have north of here?" She did not answer right away, and he did not push. He had learned a long time ago that silence in response to a question was not the same as refusing to answer. Sometimes it was just the shape of a careful person taking an honest measure of something before they spoke. "There is a debt," she said finally. "An old one. Not mine originally, but mine now." "Whose?" "My mother's." She looked at the wall behind him, not seeing it. She made a blood oath with a man named Bagrak, a hedge-mage out of the northern hills. He was supposed to cure a sickness that was killing our clan's elder. The elder lived, but my mother died 3 years later, and Bagrak claims the oath passed to the surviving bloodkin to me and that I owe him a season's service. Gideon set down his spoon. A season's service to a mage. He calls it that. It is not service. It is indentured labor at best and something considerably darker at worst. She said it without theater, just the flat stone weight of a bad situation named clearly. He has been following me since spring. Every time I try to move north to settle the debt through the clan law, I know, not his interpretation, but the actual blood oath customs of my people. He sends runners ahead to towns on the road and tells them I am a deserter from a lawful oath. That is why the market would not sell to you. Bagrak's runners reach the market towns 2 days before I do. By the time I arrive, half the merchants have been told I am a dangerous deserter under magical sanction. Her jaw tightened, not in distress but in restrained fury, the kind that has been contained for a long time and is starting to wear through. The other half just look at me and decide I am what the old stories say I am. Gideon was quiet for a moment. What do the old stories say? She looked at him then directly with those amber gold eyes. Monster, she said. They say orc women are monsters. The word sat between them. Well, Gideon said, I had fish and you had coin and we agreed on a price. I am not particularly interested in what old stories say. She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not in a way anyone watching from outside could have named, but Gideon saw it because he was close enough and paying attention. A small, precise unlocking behind the eyes, as if she had been braced for a wall and found a door instead. You are a strange man, Gideon Sullivan, she said. I have been told. She looked almost amused. I mean it as a compliment. I know, he said. So did they. She worked his farm for 4 days, and they were the most productive 4 days the Sullivan homestead had seen in 3 years. Bagrak attacked work the way she walked into rooms, directly, efficiently, without wasted motion. The field got turned. The broken section of the north fence got repaired with a speed and solidity that made Gideon quietly ashamed of how long he had been meaning to do it himself. And the drainage ditch along the eastern field edge got cleared of the mud blockage that had been slowly drowning his lower plantings. On the evenings they sat at his table after supper and talked. Not about serious things, not at first, about the road north, about the different grain varieties that did well in rocky soil, about a tournament she had seen in a border city 3 years ago where a human swordswoman had beaten 17 challengers, and then walked off the field and refused the prize purse. Why did she refuse it? Gideon asked. Because the purse was offered by the lord who had declared her city an enemy holding the year before, Bagrak said. She did not want his money, she just wanted everyone to see her win. Did they see it? Every person in that city saw it, Bagrak said. They still tell the story. On the 3rd evening she asked him about the fire summer. He told her without embellishment. The fire had started in the western hills in late summer, driven by a dry wind, and had moved east faster than anyone had been prepared for. His father had still been alive then, barely, sick with the lung fever that had been taking him slowly for a year. Gideon had gotten him out of the house and into the creek, and then gone back for the livestock. He'd saved 2 of the 3 horses and the pig and lost the rest, and when the fire had passed, there was nothing left of the house but the stone chimney and the floorboard chest that held his grandfather's savings, 43 silver marks that had sat under ash and debris for 3 days before Gideon had come back and found them. His father had died of the smoke exposure 2 weeks later. Gideon had rebuilt alone. He did not say this with self-pity. He said it the way he said most things, matter-of-factly, like a man reading from a ledger. But Bagrak listened in a way that caught everything he wasn't saying, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment. You did not leave, she said. It's my land. A lot of men would have left. A lot of men are smarter than me. "No," she said, and there was something in her voice, very quiet, very certain. "They are just smaller." He looked at her across the table, and the lantern between them made her eyes bright, and he thought, not for the first time, but more plainly than before, that he was in significant trouble. She was beautiful, and he was not sure when he had stopped being careful about noticing that. Not beautiful in the way that required adjustment or translation, just genuinely, straightforwardly beautiful, the way a well-made thing is beautiful, with the particular quality of someone who has never spent a moment of their life wishing they looked different. Her tusks caught the lantern light. Her braid had loosened slightly over the course of the evening, and a few strands of black hair lay against her jaw. She had one arm folded on the table, the muscle at her forearm catching the shadow, and she was looking at him with that full attention that always made him feel like the most interesting thing in the room. He felt it in his chest, that pull. Like gravity, only warmer. "Bagrak," he said. "Yes. 5 years ago at the well. I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward." She was very still. "How long?" "Longer than was reasonable," he said honestly. Something moved across her face, that same precise unlocking he had seen at the table 2 days ago, but deeper this time, more of it like a second door past the first. "I thought about it too," she said. "The man at the well who talked to me like I was just a person. You are just a person. Most of Thornwall would disagree with you. Most of Thornwall has never turned soil with you," he said. "I have an advantage." She was quiet a beat, and then she said, "I am going north to settle this oath business. I will be gone. I know. It is not safe to be attached to something you cannot hold on to." "No," Gideon agreed. "It isn't." He did not say, "But I am already attached." He did not need to. She could read it in him the same way she could read a field or a road, with the full attention she gave everything. She reached across the table and touched the back of his hand. Just that, her fingers resting lightly on his knuckles, her thumb tracing once across the ridge of his hand. He went very still. "Get your 30 marks," she said. "Do not let Crane have this land. I'm working on it." She pulled her hand back. The absence of it was notable. That night he lay on his side of the house listening to the fire settle, and told himself very firmly that he was a practical man with a practical problem, and there was no room in a 12-day crisis for anything else, and it did not help even slightly. On the morning of the 4th day, she packed her travel bag and stood in his yard in the early cold, and he paid her the full week's rate rather than the 4 days' rate they had agreed on, and she looked at the extra coins for a moment without picking them up. "That is more than we agreed," she said. "You did more than we agreed," he said. "That fence would have taken me a week." She looked at him. The morning was gray-white and cold, and her breath made small clouds, and she was the most self-possessed person he had ever met, and he was acutely aware of exactly how close she was standing, and exactly how much he did not want her to leave. She picked up the coins. Then she stepped forward, and for a moment he had absolutely no idea what she was going to do, and then her hand came up and touched his jaw, not hesitant, not testing, just direct, the way she did everything, and she tilted his face up slightly and kissed him. It was brief. It was not tentative. Her mouth was warm and certain and tasted like the morning, and her hand against his jaw was steady, and when she stepped back he was very still, and she was watching him with an expression that was finally, for the first time, not entirely composed. "For the well," she said. 5 years ago. Then she walked through his gate and up the creek road toward Thornwall, and he stood in his yard for a solid minute doing nothing useful. He got the 30 marks. He did it by doing something he had been refusing to do for 2 years. He knocked on his neighbor Perrin's door and asked for a loan, and Perrin, who was a decent man with a long memory of Gideon's father, gave it to him without conditions beyond a handshake and an agreement to split the spring planting labor. Gideon paid the tribunal on the 9th day, 3 days before the new moon, walked out of the magistrate's hall with his land deed still in his own name, and stood in the market square in the thin winter light, and felt the relief move through him like a tide going out. Then he stood in the square for a long moment thinking about Bagrak Darkwolf somewhere on the Greywood road, and a hedge-mage named Farok who sent runners ahead of her to close doors, and a blood oath that was not hers to carry but had been put on her anyway. He thought about the way she had kissed him without apology. He thought about the fact that he had not, in 3 years of grinding alone work and grief and grinding alone work, thought about any other human person the way he thought about her in 4 days. He went home, packed a travel bag, left a note and his house key with Perrin, and rode north on the Greywood road. He was not entirely sure what he was going to do when he got there. He was a farmer with 43 marks and a decent horse, not a warrior or a mage hunter. But he was also stubborn past the point of good sense, which had served him before, and he knew the road north, and he knew Bagrak was alone on it. The Greywood road in late autumn was exactly as unpleasant as its reputation, narrow and dark under the skeletal canopy of gray-leafed oaks, deeply rutted by merchant wagons, with a persistent cold wind that found every gap in a coat. Gideon rode through the first day and camped at the road post inn at Kell's Crossing, which was a damp stone building full of woodcutters and a smell like wet wool, and asked the innkeeper if a tall orc woman had passed through. "Day ahead of you," the innkeeper said, not with warmth. "Same as the mage's runners who were asking about her." "What mage's runners?" "2 men. Came through at dawn. Said there was a woman on the road under magical debt. Said she was dangerous." The innkeeper looked at Gideon carefully. "You looking for her?" "She worked my farm for 4 days," Gideon said. "She fixed my fence. She is approximately the least dangerous person I have met this year." The innkeeper shrugged with the particular philosophy of someone who has decided other people's business is not his own. They went ahead. An hour before she did. Gideon ate quickly and went to bed early and was back on the road before the inn was fully awake. He caught up with the situation, not with Bagrak herself, but with the shape of what was happening to her at the town of Veth's Mill, which was the only real settlement on the Greywood road between Thornwall and the clan territories. Veth's Mill had a wall. Small, more of a high wooden palisade than proper stonework, but a gate with an actual gate warden, and the gate was shut when Gideon rode up to it in the thin gray afternoon light. He could hear voices on the other side, several of them. He tied his horse at the post and went to the gate and knocked. The warden was a heavy-set man with a crossbow. He wasn't currently aiming at anything, which Gideon counted as promising. "Town is closed," the warden said. "Why?" "Mage's business." "Farok," Gideon said. The warden looked at him. "You know him." "I know about him. Open the gate." "I'm not supposed to. I'm a freehold farmer from Thornwall on a public road," Gideon said. "You cannot close a gate to a freehold farmer on a public road. That's the Crown Charter of '82. You know it and I know it." The warden squinted at him, weighing it. Gideon had no idea if there actually was a Crown Charter of '82, but he said it with a confidence he had always found more useful than accuracy. The gate opened. The scene inside was worse than he had imagined. The central square of Veth's Mill was not large, 30 or 40 people, the full population of a small mill town, arranged in a rough semicircle around the well at the center. In the middle of that semicircle, Bagrak Darkwolf stood alone. She had not drawn her knife. Her travel pack was on the ground at her feet where someone had apparently thrown it. She was standing absolutely straight, arms at her sides, chin lifted, and she looked not frightened. She did not look frightened. She was too far past frightened and well into something more dangerous. She looked incandescent with a cold, controlled fury that she was containing through sheer will. Beside the well stood 2 men Gideon did not know, Farok's runners, presumably, and between them stood a third figure, shorter and older, draped in a gray traveling robe with the particular affected shabbiness of someone who wants you to think they are more mysterious than comfortable. He had a wand or something shaped like one, and he was holding it with the theatrical air of a man who has rehearsed this scene. "Farok," Bagrak said, and her voice was controlled and terrible. "You do not have the right under clan law to call a blood oath fulfilled by proxy service. The debt was my mother's debt. It died with her." The oath bound her surviving blood, Bagrak said, with the bored patience of someone who has made this argument many times. That is the law of oath binding, and you know it. The law of oath binding requires that the original contractor name the proxy before death. My mother named no proxy. The oath is void. I have her mark on the document. You have her mark on something, Bagrak said. Show me the original. Silence. And in the silence, Gideon understood there was no original. There had never been an original. Bagrak was a fraud with 2 hired men and a rented authority, and Bagrak knew it, had probably known it for months, and had been trying to get north to the clan elders who could rule on oath law before Bagrak could close off enough roads to strand her. Gideon walked into the square. Several people turned to look at him. Bagrak's eyes moved to him briefly and then dismissed him, a farmer in a road-worn coat, nothing to worry about. Bagrak saw him. Something went through her expression, not relief, not exactly, but a sharp recognition and then a flicker of something more complicated that she shut down immediately because she needed to focus on the man with the wand. Gideon walked to the well and stood beside her. "Who are you?" Bagrak asked, with the irritable patience of someone being interrupted. "I am Gideon Sullivan," Gideon said. "Freehold farmer, Thornwall, 2 miles south on the creek road. And I am asking to see your documentation for this oath claim." "This does not concern you. She worked my farm for 4 days under a private labor agreement," Gideon said. "If she is under any kind of legal obligation that would have made her service to me improper, that is absolutely my concern. Let me see the document." "I don't need to show you. You are in the square of a free town making a claim of legal obligation against a person," Gideon said, and he was astonished at how steady his voice was. "Either you have the paperwork to back that claim or you are making a public false accusation. Which is it?" Bagrak's eyes went cold. He pointed the wand at Gideon. And Bagrak moved. She moved the way Gideon had watched her cross the market square on that first morning, directly, without hesitation, with total economy of motion. Her hand closed on Bagrak's wrist before the wand came fully up, and she turned it. Not violently, or not more violently than the situation required, but with the precise clinical efficiency of someone who knows exactly how much force is necessary and uses exactly that much, no more. Bagrak yelled. The wand hit the cobblestones. One of the runners came forward, and Gideon stepped between him and Bagrak without quite deciding to, just because the runner was going to run into him, and it seemed like the right time to be in the way. "Don't," he said. The runner stopped. He was bigger than Gideon by a significant margin, but the word had come out with something in it that even surprised Gideon a little, a flat bedrock certainty that he was not moving. The second runner looked at the first. Something passed between them, the quick calculation of hired men who have reached the edge of what they are being paid to do. Bagrak was cradling his wrist. Bagrak had released him and stepped back and was looking at him with the full weight of those amber gold eyes and absolutely nothing else. "Show the town," she said, "the original documentation, signed by my mother, witnessed, with the proxy clause included. Show it or get off this road." Bagrak looked at her and at the crowd, and the crowd was very quiet, and Gideon realized that what he had interrupted was not a victory for Bagrak, but the precarious last moment of a performance that was about to collapse, and he had just given it the push it needed. Bagrak put away his wand and said something ugly and low that Gideon could not fully hear, and then he jerked his head at the runners and walked out of the square and through the north gate of Veth's mill without a backwards glance, and the runners went after him with the unhurried dignity of men trying not to appear to be running away. The square was very quiet. Bagrak picked up her travel pack from the cobblestones. She looked at Gideon with an expression that for a moment was completely unguarded, open and startled in something else, something warm and wide like a window thrown open in a closed room. Then she said, quietly enough that only he could hear it, "You followed me." "I thought about it for an hour and a half," he said. "Then I packed a bag. You are a farmer on a road you don't need to be on because of a problem that is not yours." The way I see it, Gideon said, it became my problem when Farrak's runners started talking to market towns on a road I use. She looked at him steadily. Is that why? No, he said. That's what I told myself. That's not why. She was quiet for a long moment, and the crowd around them was dispersing now, people drifting back to their business with the slightly shaken energy of a community that had almost done something bad and had been pulled back from it at the last moment and was not sure how to feel about that. He will not stop, Bagrak said. He cannot produce the documentation because it does not exist, but he will not stop. He will find another way to apply pressure until I reach the clan elders and can file the void claim formally. How far to the clan elders? 4 days north, through the Greywood proper. Gideon looked at her. I have 4 days. She looked back at him. Her expression was doing several things at once, and behind all of them, deep in those gold eyes, was something that looked remarkably like someone who had been walking alone for a very long time and had just been offered company by someone who meant it. You would go into the Greywood for this, she said. I would go into the Greywood for you, he said. The for this is just the logistics. The moment stretched between them, full of everything they had not said at his kitchen table, and all the words felt unnecessary anyway. Then come, she said. They set out the next morning on the Greywood Road proper, just north of Veth's Mill, where the managed forest of the lowlands gave way to the real thing, old growth, dense and dark and cold, with the particular silence of places that have been wild for so long that they have forgotten human noise. The road narrowed to a track and then to a path, clear enough for a horse but barely. Gideon rode and Bagrak walked alongside him with the easy, long-striding pace of someone who had covered this ground before, and they talked steadily through the gray morning light and into the afternoon, and the conversation had the quality of 2 people making up for 5 years of missed time. She told him about her mother, Bagrak Darkwolf, who had been a healer woman in their clan, not a mage, nothing dramatic, just someone with long knowledge of plants and pain and what the body needed to recover from both, and who had met Farrak during a particularly bad season when a wasting sickness had moved through the elders and she had been desperate enough to try an outsider's cure. Did it work? Gideon asked. The elder, did they survive? Yes, Elder Voss is still alive. She is 70 years old and still argues with everyone in the clan and refuses to sleep indoors in summer, and she is the main reason I am going north, because she will remember the exact terms of the oath and will tell the truth about the proxy clause. Bagrak paused. My mother trusted Farrak because he helped. She should not have signed anything without the elders' counsel, but she was scared and she trusted him and she signed. And then she died. 3 years later, lung fever, a beat. The same as your father, he looked at her. We are collecting the same losses. Most people do, she said. It is just a question of which ones. He thought about that for the rest of the afternoon, about the way grief accumulates in a person, and either breaks them down or builds something useful, resilience or bitterness, depending on the person and the luck. And he thought that Bagrak Darkwolf had been alone with hers for a long time, carrying a false debt and a real loss, and a running battle with a fraudulent hedge-mage, and doing it with a composure that most people would call cold and that he recognized, very clearly, as the particular self-containment of someone who has had no one to fall apart in front of. They camped at a flat clearing by a stream that Bagrak knew from previous crossings, and built a fire and roasted the travel bread and dried meat she had in her pack, and sat on opposite sides of the fire in the dark with the Greywood all around them and stars visible in the narrow band of sky above the tree canopy. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The morning you left, the kiss. What did you mean by it? She was quiet for a moment, poking the fire with a stick. Exactly what it was. I'm asking for precision, he said, because I rode 4 days north on a bad road and I would like to know what I am operating on. She looked at him across the fire. The flames made her eyes bright copper and gold. I meant, she said carefully, that I had thought about that conversation at the well for 5 years. I meant that you were the first person in Thornwall who looked at me and saw a person. I meant that 4 days working your land felt more like home than anywhere I have been since my mother died. She paused. I meant all of that, in one kiss, because I do not generally say things in 4 words when I can say them in one action. He did not answer right away, not because he did not know what to say, but because what he wanted to say felt very large and he wanted to get it right. I have been alone on that farm for 3 years, he said at last. Not just physically alone. Alone in the way you are when you have stopped expecting anyone to see you. He looked at the fire. You looked at me at the well and you asked me about road conditions. And you listened to what I said like it actually mattered what I said, and I thought about it for a year afterward. I am telling you this so you understand that when I packed my bag and rode north, I was not being impulsive. I have been thinking about you in one form or another for 5 years. I just did not know where you were. Bagrak was very still. You looked for me, she said. Not effectively. I did not know your name. I asked a few travelers. Nothing came of it. He looked up at her. And then you came through the gate. She put down the stick. She looked at him across the fire with those open amber eyes, and the expression on her face was the most unguarded he had seen her, all the careful composure present but pulled back, the way you step back from a door you are about to open. Gideon, she said, come around the fire. He came around the fire. She was sitting on a fallen log and he sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and she turned to look at him. And this time when she reached up to touch his face, it was not the brief, decisive thing it had been in the farmyard. It was slower, more deliberate, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw the way she had once traced his hand across the table, reading him. He kissed her first this time. Or they moved at the same moment, and it became one thing between them, warm and unhurried, deep with everything that had been building since the market square, since the well 5 years ago, since every time he had thought her name before he knew it, and every time she had wondered about the man who talked to her like a person. When they broke apart, the fire was lower, and the night was very quiet around them, and they sat together with their shoulders touching and looked into the dark of the Greywood, and neither of them felt the need to speak for a long time, which was its own kind of answer. They continued north through the Greywood over the following 3 days, and the travel settled into a rhythm: early starts, steady miles, camps at places Bagrak knew, evenings by the fire that stretched long because neither of them wanted to stop talking. Gideon learned things about her. She had grown up in the Darkwolf clan, which was a mid-sized clan of the northern reaches. Not a great war band, not a small family group, but a working community of hunters and herders and craftspeople with a strong tradition of oath law and a council of elders who were, by all accounts, formidably thorough. She had been a trader for the clan since she was old enough to make the Thornwall road alone, which was 18, and she had done it for 6 years until her mother died and Farak had emerged with his claim and the road had become a gauntlet rather than a living. She was 27 now. He was 29. The math, he thought, was fine. He told her things about himself. About his grandfather, who had built the original Sullivan farmhouse from scratch on Crown land back when the Creek Valley was still considered frontier, and who had been the kind of man who planted orchards he knew he would not live to harvest. About his father, who had been quieter and harder and still a good man, just one who showed it through work rather than words. About himself, that he had wanted at 20 to go east and see the coastal cities, and had stayed because someone needed to, and had been angry about it for a year and then stopped being angry because the land had gotten into him somehow and it was his. You love that farm, Bagrak said, not accusing, just observing. I love that farm, he confirmed. It is a good farm, the soil reads well, even half-turned you can see what it wants to be. I know what it wants to be, he said. I just need more hands. She was quiet for a moment, walking beside his horse in the dappled gray light under the oaks. What would you do with it if you had the labor? Wheat on the north quarter, legumes on the south for the soil, the creek pasture for animals, cattle, maybe, or goats. The orchard slope on the west is old rootstock, good fruit if it gets attention. He paused, hearing himself. I sound like a man planning a future. You are a man planning a future, she said. I am a man riding into a forest 4 days from his farm, he said. She looked up at him, and there was something in her expression that was new, a tentative quality, something almost uncertain, which he had not seen on her before. What does the plan look like, she said, if there are more than one set of hands? He looked down at her from the horse. I think, he said carefully, that the plan looks significantly better. She looked away, but she was smiling. He could see it from the angle, the corner of her mouth, the small curve of it, and she did not say anything else. But the question had been asked and answered, and they both knew it. On the fourth morning, they came out of the Greywood proper into the open northern country, rolling hills, brown grass, a cold wind with something of ice in it, and in the distance, the smokes of the Darkwolf clan settlement, rising straight and steady against a white sky. Bagrak stopped at the edge of the trees and looked north for a long moment. It has been 8 months since I was here, she said. Is that long? For a clan member to be absent, yes, especially under circumstances like mine. She straightened her braid, tightened the lace of her bodice, squared her shoulders. I need to speak to Elder Voss before anyone else. Voss knows the truth. If she speaks first, the others will follow. And Farok, he cannot enter the clan grounds without an invitation. Whatever else he is, he knows the clan laws well enough not to breach that one. Her jaw set. He will wait on the road and hope I fail. Can I come in with you? She turned and looked at him. A human coming into the clan settlement uninvited would cause complication. Can you invite me? She studied him. I can present you as a companion in passage. It is an old custom, someone you have traveled with and vouched for. It is not common, but it is recognized. Then do that, he said. If you want me there. If you don't, I'll wait on the road. I want you there, she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing she had ever said. They walked into the settlement together. The Darkwolf clan's winter settlement was larger than Gideon had expected. Not a temporary camp, but a semi-permanent cluster of longhouses and hide tent workshops, organized along a central path that ran from a gate post to a large communal fire at the center. It was busy and ordered and smelled of wood smoke and cured leather, and the particular smell of a working community in autumn. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass, orc men and women and older figures, and a few young people who stared outright. But no one moved to stop them, and Bagrak walked through it all with her head up and her pace steady. Elder Voss was in the second longhouse from the central fire. She was old, genuinely old, in the way that very old people carry it, like a country rather than a condition. Short and slight, with a face that was almost entirely composed of fine lines and sharp eyes, and those eyes were the pale amber yellow of very old orc women and were, as advertised, formidably thorough. She looked at Bagrak for a long moment and said something in the orc tongue that Gideon did not catch, and Bagrak responded in kind, and then Voss looked at Gideon. The human is your companion in passage, Voss said in clean and precise common speech. Yes, Elder, he is Gideon Sullivan. He has my full vouch. Voss looked at him the way she had looked at Bagrak, completely, without polite evasion. You came from the south with her. From Thornwall, Gideon said. Yes. Why? He thought about the various polished answers he could give and discarded them. Because she is important to me, he said, and she was traveling alone into a situation that was not fair. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said, sit down, both of you. I want to hear this from the beginning. The hearing took 2 hours. It was more formal than Gideon had expected. Elder Voss brought in 2 other elders, both women of comparable age and similar sharpness, and Bagrak presented her case in a combination of the orc tongue and common speech, and the elders questioned her with a precision that would not have been out of place in a Thornwall tribunal. Gideon sat to the side and watched and said nothing unless asked, and he was asked twice. Once about the labor agreement at his farm, which established the timeline of Bagrak's movements, and once about the scene in Veth's mill, which he described as accurately as he could. Voss asked him directly, when the hedge-mage threatened her in the square, what did you do? I stood beside her, Gideon said, and then, I asked to see his documentation. Voss looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to Bagrak and said something in the orc tongue with a tone that Gideon could not fully read, but that made the other two elders murmur in agreement. The verdict was clean and absolute. Farok's claim was void. The original oath had contained no proxy clause. Voss remembered it specifically, had been present when it was made, and stated this on the council record without hesitation. The claim Farok had been pressing for 3 years was fraudulent. The runners he had sent ahead on the road to poison market towns were an actionable offense under the common law of the Trade Road Compact, which Thornwall and Veth's mill were both signatories to. Bagrak stood and listened to the verdict with a composure that Gideon understood now as the hard-won stillness of someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just been told they could put it down. When the elders finished, she said, quietly and precisely, "Thank you, Elder Voss." Voss stood and crossed the room and put her hands on Bagrak's face, not in the way of someone comforting a child, but in the way of one person fully acknowledging another, and said something very low in the orc tongue, and Bagrak closed her eyes for a moment, and then opened them and was fully composed again. But there was a brightness in her expression that had not been there before. The elders provided a written ruling, stamped with the clan seal, which would be recognized on any trade road in the region as a binding oath law judgment. Farok could contest it theoretically, but to do so he would need to present documentation he did not have in front of a council that would remember everything. He would not contest it. They were given a fireside space in the communal hall for the night and fed a proper meal clan food, which was substantial and excellent, heavy on root vegetables and smoked game, and a grain porridge that Gideon ate 3 bowls of without embarrassment. Bagrak sat across from him at the communal fire with the ruling folded in her satchel and a bowl of porridge in her hands and the first truly settled expression he had ever seen on her face, and she was quietly radiant with it, not triumphant, just freed, the particular relief of someone who has been walking with a stone in their boot for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to walk without it. "It's done," Gideon said. "It is done," she said. "He'll leave you alone now. He has no grounds and no document and no clan backing. Without those, he is just a man on a road who makes claims no one is obligated to honor." She ate a spoonful of porridge. "Yes, he will leave me alone." He watched her for a moment. "How does it feel?" She considered the question honestly. "Like putting down something I had carried for so long I forgot how heavy it was." "That is an exact description of what it looks like from the outside," he said. She looked at him across the fire, and there was something in the look that was different from all the looks that had come before, not assessing, not careful, not the precise attention of someone reading a road or a field. Something warmer and more direct and more personal. "Gideon," she said, "what do you want from this, from me?" He put down his bowl. "I want what I said in the Greywood, more than one set of hands on a good farm. Good evenings by a fire, someone who looks at me the way you look at things, like they actually matter." She was quiet for a moment. "That is a very honest answer. I thought about being more poetic about it," he said. "I couldn't pull it off." She almost smiled. "I prefer the honest one." "What do you want?" he asked. She looked at the fire for a long moment, and he did not rush her because he had learned in the Greywood that she was worth waiting for when she was working out how to say something true. "I have been on roads for 8 months, she said. "Before that I was on roads for 3 years, managing this business with Farok and keeping moving and not staying anywhere long enough to feel the absence of staying." She paused. "What I want is to stay somewhere. I want a fire that is mine. I want to wake in the morning and have the day be mine to plan, not mine to survive." She looked up at him. "I want what you described, and I want it to be with you specifically." The fire popped and settled between them. "Then come back with me," he said. "Come back to Thornwall, come back to the farm." "That farm is very muddy," she said. "I know, I would very much like your help with it." She smiled fully this time, not the almost smile or the small corner of it, but the whole thing, and it was extraordinary, warm and wide and transforming, and he sat there in the firelight of the Darkwolf clan hall and felt something in his chest settle open like a door thrown wide on a good morning. "Yes," she said, "I'll come back." That night the elders gave them separate sleeping spaces in the hall as a matter of form, but Bagrak came to him after the fire had burned low and the hall was quiet, and she sat beside him on the sleeping roll and leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and she settled her head against his neck, and they stayed like that for a long time, not sleeping, just present, listening to the wind off the northern hills and the quiet breathing of the hall around them. "I want to show you something," she said quietly. "What?" "An orc custom, for when you have decided someone is yours." She lifted her head and looked at him, and in the dark her eyes were very bright. "It is a simple thing, a mark, not a wound. It does not hurt much, more like a seal, something that says in our custom that I have chosen you and I am not uncertain about it." He looked at her for a moment. "Show me." She reached into her satchel and brought out a small bone case which held a needle and a dark pigment the color of deep water. She took his left wrist and held it in the firelight, and with great care and precision, drew a small mark on the inside of his wrist. A single clean line with two smaller lines crossing it, like a path meeting a crossroads, which she explained was the clan shorthand for a journey completed. "It means," she said quietly, applying the pigment with steady hands, "that you arrived, that you are where you were going." He looked at it. Then he looked at his own wrist and said, "Can I do one for you?" She looked at him, surprised. "You know what it means." "I know what it means," he said. "I mean it." She held out her wrist. He was not a man of particular artistic skill, but she guided his hand, and the mark he made was imprecise and slightly crooked, and he said so, and she said it didn't matter. It was the meaning, not the technique, and she held her wrist up in the firelight afterward and looked at his work for a long time with an expression that made the crookedness of it irrelevant. They were quiet together after that, sitting with their backs against the longhouse wall and their wrists together, the small marks catching the last of the fire's light. "In the morning," he said, "we start back." "In the morning," she said. He felt her settle more firmly against his side, and he thought of the farm, the muddy fields, the fence Perrin was watching, the south quarter that wanted proper seeding, the creek pasture that wanted cattle, and he thought of all of it as something that had been waiting, not running down, just waiting for the right moment and the right company. And the thought was so much lighter than anything he had felt on that farm in 3 years that he had to take a slow breath to accommodate it. In the morning they rose early and said proper farewells to Elder Voss, who gave Bagrak an additional document, a clan certificate of good standing, which would travel ahead on the road faster than any of Farok's runners, and which would, Voss promised with the calm certainty of someone who has outlasted every problem she has ever faced, close the door on his interference permanently. Voss shook Gideon's hand before they left. Her grip was formidable. "You came north for her," Voss said. "Yes," Gideon said. "She came south for herself," Voss said, "and found you there. I think that is how it should be." She looked at him with those pale, sharp eyes. "Take care of each other." "That is the exact plan," Gideon said. They headed south through the Greywood in the cold morning, Bagrak walking beside the horse with her travel pack settled comfortably, and the satchel with the ruling and the certificate over one shoulder, and Gideon riding loose and easy in the saddle with the autumn light coming through the bare upper branches of the oaks in long gray columns, and between them the particular ease of people who have come through something hard together and arrived somewhere good. They talked all day. They talked about the farm, the cattle question, which Bagrak had strong opinions about. Goats first, she said. They required less land and gave more per head and were harder to kill through amateur error. And about the orchard slope, she had worked with old fruit rootstock before and thought it was salvageable with a season's attention. And about the bunkroom off the barn, which was functional but not comfortable, and about what could be done about that. "It latches from the inside," Gideon noted, and she gave him a look of thorough amusement. "I did not sleep in the bunkroom for my own protection," she said. "I slept there because it was offered and I was not going to make assumptions." And now, he said, she looked at him with those gold eyes, direct and warm. Now I would like to sleep by the fire in the main room, she said, and eventually, when you have had time to plan and I have had time to settle, somewhere considerably more comfortable than either the bunk room or the floor. That, he said, is a plan I can commit to. She reached up and took his hand where it rested on the saddle horn, and held it as they moved through the gray-gold light of the Greywood, and neither of them said anything more about it because nothing more needed to be said. At Veth's mill they stayed the night at the mill-keeper's house. The gate warden, apparently regretting the previous afternoon's obstruction, had cleared their entry with visible discomfort. And in the morning, the mill-keeper's wife told them that Farrock and his 2 runners had come back through heading east 2 days before, moving fast, with the particular purposeful hurry of men who are cutting their losses. Bagrak read the clan ruling document to the mill-keeper, who listened and then asked if he could keep a copy for the town records, because if Farrock ever came back through sending runners ahead with claims, they needed something to counter it. Bagrak gave him a copy. He thanked her with the genuine relief of a man who had done something he was not proud of and had been handed a way to do better. They came back into Thornwall on the 9th day since Gideon had left it, riding through the north gate at midday on a market day, which meant the square was full and the crowd was there, and the turning of heads was immediate and complete. Gideon rode in and Bagrak walked beside him, and people stopped and stared not because of him. They barely looked at him. They looked at her, and Gideon could see the shape of it, the flinch of recognition, the reaching for fear or contempt that the old stories prescribed. He pulled the horse to a stop in the middle of the square, near the eastern well, which seemed appropriate. He swung down from the saddle and stood beside Bagrak and said, to no one in particular and therefore to everyone, "This is Bagrak Darkwolf. She has spent the last week resolving a legal dispute through the northern clan courts, which she has done successfully. She holds a full judgment document and a certificate of good standing from the Darkwolf clan elders. She is a free person on a public road, and she will be working the Sullivan homestead going forward." Silence. The miller looked at the tanner. The tanner looked at the butcher. Aldrich Crane's man, there was always at least one of Crane's men in the market square, looked at Gideon with the small, calculated expression of someone recalibrating. Bagrak stood beside him with her head level, and those gold eyes scanning the square with the frank, direct gaze that had no interest in apologizing for itself. And she looked, as she always looked, completely certain of her right to take up exactly as much space as she occupied. Nobody said anything. After a moment, because nature abhors a vacuum and someone has to go first, old Perrin's wife at the vegetable stall said, in her carrying practical voice, "Well, come buy something then. That wool won't sell itself." And that was that. Not a transformation, not a triumph, just the small ordinary permission that one decent person gives a crowd to be decent too. Bagrak almost smiled and moved toward the wool stall, and Gideon fell into step beside her, and the market went back to being a market. They spent the afternoon in Thornwall, Bagrak, presenting the legal documents at the magistrate's hall, which established the record of the fraud claim's dismissal, and Gideon stopping at Perrin's to pick up the house key and update his neighbor on the general situation. And Perrin looked from Gideon to Bagrak and back to Gideon with the philosophical expression of a man whose business is growing things and who knows that soil and seeds and people all follow the same basic logic. "She can mend fence?" Perrin asked. "Better than both of us," Gideon said. "Right then," Perrin said, and went back to his yard. They rode home on the creek road in the late afternoon, the farm coming into view as the light went golden, and Gideon watched Bagrak look at it, the low stone house with the tall chimney, the barn, the turned fields, the creek catching the light at the far end of the south pasture, and he watched her expression do the thing it had done in the Greywood when she sat beside him at the fire. She settled. Something in her settled visibly like a person arriving. She turned to him and said, "Show me the orchard slope." He showed her the orchard slope. It was on the west side of the property, a gentle rise above the creek, with 12 old apple trees that had been planted by his grandfather and had gone largely untended for 3 years, and were consequently a beautiful productive mess, overgrown, tangled, heavy with old wood, but deeply rooted and full of next spring's potential if someone got in there with a saw and some patience. Bagrak walked between the trees with her hands out, touching the bark, reading the growth the way she read everything with full attention, seeing what was there rather than what she expected. 2 seasons, she said. Hard pruning in the spring, summer work on the soil, second autumn you'll have fruit again. I believe you, he said. She turned to look at him in the last gold light of the afternoon, standing between his grandfather's apple trees with her braid over one shoulder and her travel-worn clothes and her amber gold eyes, and she was beautiful in a way that made him want to stand very still so as not to break the moment. Gideon, she said. Yes. I want to stay. I know, he said. I want you to. She came to him through the long grass between the apple trees with that same direct, unhurried certainty she brought to everything she wanted, and she kissed him in the orchard in the golden light with her hands against his chest and his arms around her, and it was nothing like the brief decisive thing in the farmyard a week ago. It was long and warm and deep, tasting of the road and the cold air and the particular sweetness of arriving somewhere you mean to stay. When they drew back, she kept her hands at his chest and looked up at him and said, very quietly, I have not stayed anywhere since my mother died. I know. This is new, for me, to want to stay. I know, he said again, because he did know, because he could see it in her, the small edge of something almost frightened behind the certainty, and he put his hand over hers at his chest and held it there. Take the time you need. We have time. She looked at him and nodded once precisely. Then she said, Let us go fix dinner. I am hungry and that fire has not been lit all day and the house will be cold. He laughed. He could not help it. It came out full and genuine. The kind of laugh that surprises you with how good it feels. And she looked at him with that new full smile, and the last of the autumn light was on both of them, and it was the best moment he had had in 3 years. They went back to the house. The first evening back was simple fire, food, the comfortable reconnection with a space after days of travel. Bagrak walked through the house with the same reading attention she gave everything, touching the stone of the chimney, looking at the floorboards, examining the window frames with a practical eye. She found 4 immediate problems and told him about them without editorializing. The north window latch was failing. The chimney wanted cleaning before winter. There was a weak board in the kitchen floor that would go through by spring if it was not addressed, and the barn door needed new hinges. I know about the barn door, Gideon said. Did you know about the window? No. That is why you need me, she said, and went to sit by the fire with a directness that suggested this was a completely straightforward statement of fact and not the enormous thing it was. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her sitting in his father's old chair by the fire and thought, yes, that is exactly why. Over the following weeks, Thornwall had to adjust to the existence of Bagrak Darkwolf in the way that small towns adjust to anything, incrementally, unevenly, with pockets of genuine welcome and pockets of determined refusal. Gideon did not spend much energy managing either, because the farm required most of his attention and Bagrak did not require his protection in any social sense. She managed the town herself with the same composure she brought to everything, neither seeking approval nor performing indifference, just being present and useful and exactly who she was. The market square, after the first week, became unremarkable. She sold things, their dried goods from the farm, late-season produce, and once a remarkable amount of applewood she had pruned from the orchard, which burned with an exceptional smell and which the town baker bought the full load of. The baker's wife invited her for tea. She went. She came back and told Gideon that the baker's wife made excellent elderflower cordial and had very strong opinions about roof thatch. Aldrich Crane's man came to the farm once in the 3rd week with an offer that was not quite a threat, but had the shape of one Crane was still interested in the Creek Road property, would increase the offer now that the farm was running better. Bagrak opened the door before Gideon could and looked at Crane's man with a flat, direct gaze and said, "The farm is not for sale. If Mr. Crane sends someone to the door again with an offer, he will be receiving a response through the magistrate about the condition of his west boundary fencing, which is currently encroaching on Sullivan Creek land by approximately 4 feet. Good day." Crane's man left. Crane did not send anyone again. Gideon stood behind Bagrak in the doorway after the man had gone and said, "I didn't know about the fence." "I measured it last week," she said. "I wanted to know what we had." "We," he said. She turned and looked at him. "Yes," she said, "we." The word sat between them warm and certain and entirely unambiguous. They got the goats, 3 of them, a matter that Bagrak approached with a research thoroughness that Gideon found both impressive and mildly terrifying, and began the process of fencing the creek pasture properly for them. The work was good, the kind of work that requires 2 people and a decent plan, and produces something visible at the end of the day. And they worked well together in the particular collaborative way of people who have their own ways of doing things but are genuinely interested in each other's ways. She was better at fencing than him. He was better at the soil prep. She was better at reading weather, which was an orc skill she had grown up with. Something about the way the northern territories changed quickly. You learned to read a sky early. He was better at the financial side, managing the tribute records, the market prices, the agreements with Perrin and the other neighboring farmers. They fit together the way good tools fit in a well-made box, not because they were the same, but because the differences were complementary. In the evenings they read. Bagrak had a small collection of books she had acquired over years of trading, including 2 in the orc tongue which she translated for him, haltingly and with colorful editorial comment, and which were considerably more interesting than any book he had read before. He had his grandfather's farming journals, which she read with the rapt attention of an archaeologist, asking questions about every 3rd entry. They ate well. Bagrak cooked with the same efficiency and directness she did everything, producing meals that were better than Gideon had managed in years, and he learned from her and got better himself. One evening in the deep cold of winter, with the fire high and the wind off the Greywood battering the north window, now properly latched, she was sitting in the old chair with one of her books, and he was at the table with the farm ledger, and he looked up, and she was in the firelight with her braid loose over one shoulder and her feet tucked up in the chair, and the book open in her hands, and she was so entirely and completely present in his home, in his life, that the moment hit him with a force that was physical. She looked up and caught him looking. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said, "just looking." She held his gaze for a moment, and then she set the book down and stood and crossed the room to where he sat at the table and stood in front of him, close, and tilted his face up the way she had done that first morning in the farmyard, and she looked at him for a long, steady moment. "You look at me," she said, "like you are not going to get tired of it." "I'm not," he said. "Most people look at me like I am something to be assessed for danger." "I assessed you for danger in the first 30 seconds at the market," he said. "I concluded you were not dangerous to me. And now I know that you are deeply dangerous to me," he said, "but not in the way I meant then." She sat down on the edge of the table in front of him, looking down at him, and she said, "Gideon Sullivan, I want to tell you something." "Tell me." "I have never chosen anyone," she said. "Not like this. Not decided with intention that this was the person I was going to be with." She paused. "My people have a word for it. The choosing. It is different from wanting someone or being with someone. It is the decision that this person is yours and you are theirs, and you are not going to revise that decision." She looked at him steadily. "I am making that decision. About you. I want you to know that I know what I am deciding, and I am deciding it." He stood up. He was close to her now, close enough to see the firelight in detail in her eyes, the small, precise amber and copper of it. "I made that decision," he said, "somewhere on the Greywood Road, possibly earlier." She exhaled a small sound, almost surprised by how much she had needed to hear that. He put his hands on her face the way she had put her hands on his, learning the shape of it, and he kissed her slowly and completely. And she kissed him back with everything she had been careful about giving and was no longer being careful with. And the fire behind them was warm, and the north wind was outside where it belonged, and the farm was silent and theirs. Later, much later, they lay together by the fire with the old quilt pulled over them and the last of the log burning down to coals, and she was warm against his side with her head on his shoulder and her hand over his heart, and the marks on their wrists were close together in the dim light. Hers and his, journey completed, arrived. "You know what the town is going to say," he said. "The town can say what it likes," she said. "I have the magistrate's record, the clan judgment, a clan certificate of good standing, and 4 feet of Crane's fence to argue about if anyone wants to start a conversation." He felt the laughter in his chest before it came out. "You have thought about this?" "I think about everything," she said. "It is my nature. It is a very useful nature." "I know." She tilted her head to look up at him. "What does it feel like, being chosen by me specifically? I want to know." He thought about it honestly. "It feels like the farm looked when I got back after the fire," he said. "Not destroyed, waiting, like everything that was supposed to be there was still there, just buried under the damage. And then someone came and helped me see it was still good." She was quiet for a moment. "That is a very good answer. I told you I couldn't manage the poetic version," he said, "but the true version fits better anyway." She settled more firmly against him. "Yes," she said, "it does." The winter passed in the particular rhythm of a farm in cold season, the daily work of keeping animals and keeping warm and planning the spring, the evenings by the fire, the market weeks in Thornwall where Bagrak was by now a known quantity, and then the grain merchant had privately apologized to her in the most awkward 3 sentences of his life, and she had accepted with a grace that was both genuine and mildly terrifying. Spring came in the way springs come after hard winters suddenly, all at once, a week of cold and then a week of warmth, and then the world going green overnight like it had been waiting to exhale. The orchard slope needed attention as Bagrak had promised, and they spent 2 weeks on it pruning, soil work, the careful tracing of the old root systems to see what was still vital. The trees were alive, all 12 of them. Under the overgrowth and the dead wood, the old rootstock was solid and wanting. Bagrak found a new shoot on the oldest tree, pushing up through the ground beside the main trunk, healthy and strong. "There," she said, crouching beside it with her hands in the soil. "That one will be the best tree in the orchard in 10 years. "In 10 years," he said. She looked up at him. "Yes, in 10 years." He understood exactly what she was saying. "I'll need to build up the west side of the barn before then," he said. "The eaves overhang is not doing enough for the weather." "I know," she said. "I have been planning it." "Of course you have." She stood and brushed the soil from her hands and looked at him with that full attention, and behind the practical planning was something else, something warmer and wider. "Are you happy?" she asked. Simply, directly. He thought about it. About the farm and the spring and the orchard slope and the 3 goats and the creek pasture and Perrin's handshake agreement. And the 12 days he had almost lost all of it, and the market square and the well and the Greywood road and the fire in the Darkwolf hall and the old chair in the evening and the marks on their wrists and all of it, all of the last 6 months. "Yes," he said. "Are you?" She looked at the orchard, the old apple trees putting out their first clean spring buds, the creek catching the light below, the farm around them in the morning air. "More than I knew was available to me," she said. He took her hand, and she turned it and held his, and they stood in the orchard on the slope in the morning light, and there was nowhere either of them needed to be except exactly there. The thread of Farrock had been the last of the old weight, and it was gone, dismissed by an elder's precise memory, and a piece of paper with a seal on it. And the tribute was paid, and the land was safe, and Crane had backed off, and the town had found its way to something that was not acceptance, exactly, but was the practical version of it, which was all either of them had asked for. They walked back toward the farmhouse through the spring grass, side by side, and the door was open and the fire inside was low and warm, and the goats in the creek pasture were making the particular noise that goats make when the morning is good, and the grass is new, and everything is essentially as it should be. Bagrak pushed open the gate and went through first and held it for him, and he went through after her and latched it behind them, and the farm was alive around them in the spring morning, the turned fields, the orchard slope, the creek, the chimney smoke, the whole forward-facing life of a place that had been waiting to exhale and was finally exhaling. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make breakfast." "You made breakfast yesterday," he said. "I know, come inside anyway." He went inside. The door closed behind them and the spring morning continued outside, and the farm went on being the farm, which was to say theirs, which was to say exactly what it had been waiting to be. The old stories had called her monster. The old stories had a lot to say about women like Bagrak Darkwolf, about tusks and strength and the northern clans, about what it meant when an orc woman looked at you with gold eyes in the firelight of a market town and did not apologize for the space she took up. The old stories had not accounted for an eastern well and a half-hour conversation about road conditions. They had not accounted for a farmer who looked up from his stall and watched her work through 4 merchant refusals with glass-cutting composure and thought, "That is a person." They had not accounted for a cold farmhouse kitchen and a lantern between them and the slow accumulation of evenings that meant something. Most of all, the old stories had not accounted for the moment when she came through his door on a cold October morning looking for work, and he gave her the second spade without hesitation, and she looked at him and knew, because she noticed everything, that he was looking at her the way almost no one ever did. Not to assess the danger, not to perform tolerance, not to decide whether she was what the stories said, just looking. Because she was there and worth looking at, and he had no particular interest in doing anything else. She had sat in his lantern light at that kitchen table and let him look, and the thing that had unlocked behind her eyes was not softness, not vulnerability, it was recognition. The specific and rare and almost unbearably good recognition of being truly seen by someone who sees clearly and is not afraid of what they find. That was how it had begun. And now it was spring, and the orchard was waking, and the debt was settled, and the land was theirs, and the morning was ahead of them like a long, good road with nowhere to be but on it together, moving forward done.